Now, Eli Lilly is one of the biggest drug manufacturers in the country. Now, they make billions of dollars in profit each year off of life-saving drugs like insulin. Now, all this profit, of course, comes from making sure these drugs are incredibly expensive. In fact, there has been a lot of allegations of price gouging. Now, it wasn't always like that, apparently, according to a former executive of Eli Lilly. Now, she recently came out and explained how these companies went from having an atmosphere of making drugs for, the betterment of mankind, right, to only worrying about making massive profits. Now, this is Frances Leaf, right? So now she worked in management for Eli Lilly, but no longer does. When she did, she saw firsthand how when the company started jacking up the price of drugs and why. Now, one of the examples, of course, is their Humalog insulin. Back in 1996, when she worked for the company, it was priced at about $21 per vial. Now, that same insulin costs $275 today. Now, that's shocking when you look at those price differences in such a short amount of time, especially considering how it's not any more expensive to make. It still costs about $5 a vial to make. Now, Leith, she says, look, from what I've seen being in there and being part of those discussions, that's not surprising at all. I am not surprised a bit. In fact, when she started her career, she explained, there was an internal company slogan Leith would hear, quote, "We make drugs as if people's lives depend on it." Okay, well, now that was back in 1987. Now, back then, the company's portfolio had focused on medicines for acute illnesses, including several antibiotics. One of the things she says I liked about working there was the conversation was very much about patients. You could see that our products like Ciclor were treating infections and saving lives. Now, she worked there, she worked in the finance division, then she decided she was going to go back to school, complete her MBA at Cornell's Johnson Graduate School of Management, and go back to work at that same company in a new position. Now, she ended up going to Lilly's Business Development and Strategic Planning Division, and while she was in that role, she ended up working directly with senior management. Now, when she started working with management, she, around 2000, she said, is where everything started going really, really wrong for the patient. Now, in 2000, Lilly was waging a court battle aimed at protecting one of their patents. Now, that patent is Prozac. So, look, I think patent law at this point is a joke. I think there's these companies that hold on to patents for way too long. They take it to court. And there's a specific phrase for it, but I can't recall at this moment. But they just hold on to it. Maybe it's like green labeling or something. Probably not. But they basically, like I said, hold on to these patents for inordinate amount of times so that they can, of course, keep the monopoly on the drug and keep prices high, continue to keep that profit flowing. So now, in this case, Eli Lilly was trying to hold on to the patent for Prozac. Now, they ended up losing that. Now, that was a giant hit to the company because Prozac was earning this company $2.6 billion a year. That was a quarter of Eli Lilly's entire yearly revenue. Now, when the company lost that case, its stock price dropped more than 30% in anticipation of Prozac's patent expiring into August of 2001. Now, the impact, Leith says, was immediate. Quote, there was a huge amount of external pressure to get earnings back up and the stock price along with them. And look, this is a good example of why a drug company shouldn't be for profit. Inside the company, you had staff saying, quote, we just lost $2 billion a year. Am I going to get laid off? Now, lucky for them and unlucky for us, the company actually had a big win. In clinical trials, its Xigris product was proven to be effective at treating severe sepsis. Now, what is sepsis? It's basically a complication from infection that killed about 225,000 people each year and had no approved drug to fight it. Sepsis is incredibly deadly if you have it. Now, just 2 months after Prozac lost its patent, the FDA gave Lilly the green light to sell Xigris And of course, the timing for the company couldn't have been better. The Wall Street Journal back in September 2001 had reported, quote, Xigris may just be what the doctor ordered for Lilly. Well, I guess when it comes to their profit margin. So now the question, of course, inevitably came up. So now that we can sell this drug, how much do we sell it for? You're going to be shocked to find out that when they're trying to figure out how much to sell something for, they don't just look at manufacturing, how much it's going to cost, and potential profit margin. They basically pull it out of their butt, as you're going to see. Leith recalls a primary consensus forming around the price of about $500 per dose. Now, that's still a lot of money. $500, they explain, was about 100 times more than the company's manufacturing cost. So now that would have actually netted them quite a bit of profit. But it was not enough. You think $500 is bad? Here's the next quote. It's going to piss you off. Leith said she heard, quote, all of a sudden the price everyone talked about wasn't $500 per dose. It was $10,000 per dose. She recalled, quote, someone just pulled that figure out of their derriere and then it just became the number. Jesus, man. I mean, can you believe? Of course you can believe it. Their greed knows no bounds. You know, sepsis is incredibly deadly, right? And so what this drug company is saying is, well, we got to make profit. Your money or your life, basically. But it gets even worse. It gets more disgusting. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's so incredibly arbitrary. They decided we're just going to pull $10,000 out of our butt and see if we can get it. I mean, that's a lot of money. So per dose, $10,000 per dose. Oh, but again, it gets worse because the reasoning is so incredibly gross. But first, Eli Lilly, of course, is not the first company to do this. Actually, they might be. But later on, a lot of people took the example from Eli Lilly. In 2015, the Senate Finance Committee conducted an 18-month investigation into how Gilead Services arrived at then record prices of $84,000 and higher for its sofosbuvir-based hepatitis C medication. Now, the Senate investigation found that the company considered the remarkable effectiveness of the medicine, whose rights it had purchased. They did not do the R&D. They did not develop it. They just bought it off somebody else. They looked closely at what the market would bear, mainly insurance companies. And by the way, this is why your insurance is so ungodly expensive. And they set the highest price they thought they could get away with. Look, this is what they're doing, right? Now, you think that they'd get a lot of pushback for that, right? Well, apparently they were prepared for that. Once the drug was released, one company vice president offered a pep talk in an internal email. He said, quote, and this is in late 2013, right? Let's hold our position whatever competitors do, or whatever the headlines. Let's not fool to advocacy pressure in 2014. And so you know what they did? They held on to it. It worked. It worked. In the 21 months after the hepatitis medicines were introduced, the company collected $20.6 billion in revenue. That translated into a corporate-wide profit margin of 50%. Now, you want to know why it worked, why it was effective? Because without medication, people die. It's your money or your life. There's more. That same year, the Wall Street Journal published an inside account of how Pfizer executives decided to set the price of a new breast cancer drug. As their Gilead counterparts did, Pfizer's team ignored the research and manufacturing costs and instead focused on discovering the maximum price insurers would be willing to pay and at what price level physicians would balk at prescribing the drug. Now, instead of going with $10,000 a month per month cost, Pfizer said, well, we're going to try to do it a little stevier, right, to try to trick people into buying. Executives decided that the new breast cancer drug, like microwaves and televisions and things like that, would be sold at $9,850 a month. So it's kind of like, it's $99.99. Well, in this case, it's $98.50 for a month instead of $10,000. Well, I mean, we could have went with $10,000, but $98.50 sounds a little bit more fair. Now, see, again, that was after Xigris, which was back in 2001. You could say that they set the stage for this. So now, what did Leith do when these discussions were taking place back in 2001 to see how much money they're going to get for Xigris? Well, now, she told her boss, after this whole $10,000 per dose thing came around, that she's like, well, look, it's not justified. You cannot justify this price by either research or manufacturing costs. Even with a healthy profit added in, $10,000 is just way too much. Now, here's what her boss responded with. Quote, if your grandma's on the table, no one's going to blink at paying $10,000 to save her life. That's an executive at Eli Lilly. That's one of her bosses. Hey, man, if your grandma's on the table, what would you pay to save her life? Just give us all you have, all your money. If you ever want to see grandma again. I mean, my God. And now it gets even worse. Leith had said, quote, it was a phrase that came to be repeated in the Lilly executives' pricing discussions from then on. If grandma is on the table. So that's how they justify that. And I'm sorry, that was not a quote from Eli. That was Leith. That was actually from the article in Common Dreams. So that's what they're going with, right? That was a rationale going forward. Hey, man, look, yeah, of course we're going to jack this up. Why? Well, hey, if your grandma's on the table, you pay it. Wouldn't you? These are horrible people. These aren't people that are out to help people. These aren't normal business people. These are predators. They have no conscience. I mean, seriously, ripping people off. Hey, man, look, if your grandma's on the table, of course you pay it. Nobody says that except for a sociopath. I mean, it's profit motive above everything else. Hey, man, if you don't want grandma to die, you better pay us a ransom. Just give us everything so we can line our pockets. It is the most sickening thing. People like this guy, you guys make me sick. You guys make us all sick. You're lowlives. Bags of excrement. That's what you are. You deserve to be shut down, thrown out into the street, and all the profit that you extorted from good, hard-working people that you screwed over, that profit deserves to be returned to them, back to their pockets. Words cannot express the disgust I feel for the executives at these different places. Pfizer, Eli Lilly, the other drug manufacturers. I mean, my God. You know what the price ended up being for this drug? Not $10,000. $6,500 a dose. Now remember, $500. This is where the conversation started. $500 was 100 times more money than it takes to manufacture the drug. Yet they wanted to get $6,500 from it. And then, of course, they ended up getting their ransom for at least a short time. In the end, Xigris did not live up to the hopes of either the company or the patients, despite being $6,500 a dose. It didn't even work. Although Lilly consistently made $100 million a year from the drug, it was pulled from the market in 2011 after further clinical testing showed that it did not have a positive impact on patient survival. So not only was it super expensive, it didn't even work right. All the promise behind that drug, behind the justification, behind that massive price gouging increase, I mean the soul-crushing increase of that price, wasn't even worth it in the end. Wasn't even worth it in the end. My God, man. So now what happened to Leith, right? Now she was there during this discussion. This is how we know. Now, while she was working at Eli Lilly, she made a ton of money. She was making six figures. She would get bonuses of $30,000 a year. She made a boatload of money. But in the end, she said, look, I can't justify being here anymore. I don't care that I'm making all this money. I got to go. She said, quote, I was struggling, both emotionally and physically. I felt like I was participating in things that conflicted with being a Christian or even just a decent human being. She ended up quitting the company and now works as a realtor. Now, when talking to Common Dreams about this, she noted of how Eli Lilly is right now currently price gouging on insulin. And she said this, quote, they have not generated the next blockbuster drug, and they feel the pressure to make as much money as they did when they had a blockbuster. So they're making up the difference with their chronic care medicines. That strategy was an active part of conversation when I was there. So that's what they're doing. That's what Eli Lilly does. Hey, man, we don't have a blockbuster drug. Why? Most of these companies aren't even looking in research and development at this point. I don't remember if it was Pfizer or not that pulled research from a drug that would have, I think, cured Alzheimer's. They pulled it so that they could focus on basically drugs that continue to make them a profit. They don't want to cure things. They just want drugs that for chronic illnesses so they can continue to go back to that well, so they can continue to make those short-term profit margins. It is sickening. It is disgusting. And so that is why we cannot have these kinds of drugs being used to make a profit. Bernie Sanders calls out these pharmaceutical companies. He's absolutely right. They are bloodsuckers. That all they care about is massive profit. Now, Leith agrees. She said, quote, I've concluded that there are some drugs that simply do not belong in the hands of a for-profit company. They are driven by motivations that have nothing to do with the health of the patients. And that's what you have to understand. They are not on your side. They're on no one's side but their own. The shareholders, the executives, and themselves, lining their pockets with your money. We've got to eliminate that profit motive. We've got to rein in these blood-sucking companies because they've shown that they will have no hesitation in crushing us beneath their boot. We've got to fight back, and we've got to stop them. Great way to do that, Medicare for all, rein in these drug companies, and Bernie Sanders and a lot of progressives, we have plans to do that. So if you're as frustrated and as angry at this story, consider who you're voting for in 2020. It may be the difference between life or death. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.